Well, good morning, everyone. Plenty of seats if you would like to sit and find an open space. It's a pleasure to have you here today at the Food Summit. This is part of the levers track, where we start to understand a little bit about policy and how we interact in some spaces. This follows on the federal discussion that we had earlier today. Now we're going to talk a little bit about state and local opportunities when we're here. So I'm going to just allow folks to grab a seat so that they can sit down. As I mentioned before, we're going to work a little bit in the state space now and the local space as we think about it. I was thinking a little bit about these notes and what this session means for us when I was having breakfast this morning. Could you please raise your hand if you had breakfast this morning? For those of you not raising your hand, the parent in me says, you need to be eating breakfast. But when you sit on that plate and look at that plate, aren't you just amazed? Aren't you just amazed at the magnificent mess that the food system is? I mean, have you thought about that a little bit? That everything that you had today in that meal, in that breakfast, was the result of a remarkable decentralized system with lots of individual players who all came together and put on your plate something that was important for nourishment, that was important for your sustenance, was important for your culture, and important for your well-being. And all of that works in harmony closely together. And what I think is true is that anytime you happen to be part of the food system, you may have an angle, you may have a different perspective depending on where you are in that. And the power is being able to bring those things together and share those ideas. Would you agree with that in thinking about that? Well, I think state policy is a lot like that too. Well, for the experts that are going to be here, they're going to talk about it. It's a bit of a magnificent mess. And it depends on where you stand inside that policy generation process that gives you a perspective. And being able to share those perspectives, to build coalitions, being able to communicate in those spaces, that uncovers the levers that you have in order to be able to make change. And I think that's a lot about what we're about today as we think about the state levers that you can pull. So just to give you a sense for where we're going, I'm James Pritchett, Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences, very happy to be able to facilitate today the discussion that we'll have with our experts that are here. We'll spend a little bit of time introducing those folks so you get to know them right away. And then they, in turn, will provide some of the information. And then we'll have some questions, some guided questions, and maybe take a few questions from you in the audience today. So I look forward to our robust discussion and the meal that we'll have together. Let me just take a little bit of time to give you a sense for who the folks are that are with us today. Hollis, I'm glad your picture's up there. Hollis is pinch hitting for us a little bit today. So pleased to have you with us. Hollis Glenn is currently the Deputy Commissioner of Operations for the Colorado Department of Agriculture. Previously, he served for 7 years as the Director of Inspection and Consumer Services Division of the CDA. Hollis serves on the Board of Directors of the American Association of Feed Control Officials and on the FDA's Governing Council for Partnerships for Food Protection. In 2021, Governor Polis appointed Hollis to represent CDA on the Colorado Food System Advisory Council. That's an important state council for us when we think about food. And he was a Who's Who's in Agriculture honoree by the Denver Business Journal in 2020. Hollis has over 15 years. It feels like an eye blink, doesn't it? Over 15 years of dedicated public service to the state of Colorado. So Hollis will speak to us first. Jim Ehrlich is sitting next to Hollis. Jim Ehrlich is the Executive Director of the Colorado Potato Administrative Committee in the San Luis Valley of Colorado. Jim has a BS in agronomy from Colorado State University, go Rams, and has spent his entire career in agriculture. I always appreciate the chance to be able to sit and chat with Jim to get perspective and to learn from his knowledge of production agriculture and the ways that the food system works together. Jim has spent time in agriculture as a farmer first and then an agronomist for the Coors Brewing Company, and now represents Colorado's potato growers with a true passion for potatoes and the growers themselves. You know, his mantra is that potatoes are good for you. I hope when you had breakfast you had some on your plate today, and that you tell Jim a little bit about that. And farmers are the lifeblood of our country. That's an important part of who he is. Roberto Mesa is also a farmer, a first-generation farmer, and a local food advocate. Originally from Mexico, Roberto is the co-founder of Emerald Gardens, a year-round greenhouse farm in Bennett, Colorado, and CEO of the East Denver Food Hub, a local food supplier based in Denver. His work lies at the intersection of policy, sustainable agriculture, food systems, and environmental stewardship. He's the board president of the National Young Farmers Coalition, board member of the Zero Food Print, that's correct. And I lost my site, co-chair of the Land Access Committee for the Mile High Farmers, and governor-appointed member of the Colorado Agricultural Commission. Roberto's going to share something about the Colorado Agricultural Commission today. Ashley Wieland is here with us too as well, and is the Director of the Public Policy at Hunger Free Colorado. Her passion for policy has included work as the policy attorney at the Colorado Consumer Health Initiative, the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Planned Parenthood over the Rocky Mountains, and now in this role. Throughout her career, she has worked with many community-focused organizations, state legislators, congressional members, and state administrations. I think you've seen how they put all this mess together, Ashley, is what they're saying, to put forth policies to help more Coloradans access health care and food. Ashley is a Coloradan from birth, born in Greeley, grew up in Montrose, Trinidad, and the Denver metro area. You've gotten to know a little bit of the state, Ashley. So these are our experts, our panelists today that will share some of their ideas. You know, it's interesting when you're thinking about state levers. We had that federal farm bill discussion we had just before. You know, anything that's not directly ascribed to the federal government then falls to the states. And the states have the opportunity to be able to put together policies in action to make change as per what our constituents are interested in. They only delegate very specific authorities to local governments. So there's an interplay there where local governments really are preempted in some sense by what takes place at the state level. So we'll think about that, those restrictions and those structures that are in place as we think about things like, well, maybe it happens to be food safety, which FDA at the federal level provides for us. We do a lot of that at the state level. And sometimes our local organizations interact in those spaces, especially around compliance and training. Or we may think about that in terms of conservation, which we heard a lot about in our previous session, that there are agencies like the U.S. Department of Agriculture or the Department of Interior that really focus a lot on conservation pieces. But it's at the state level where we ladder up to those opportunities and then be able to set our own policies that are often more robust than they may be at the federal level, with local communities participating voluntarily in those spaces. So it's really an interesting intersection of how we shift from a federal venue to a state venue. So Hollis, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your perspective on that and talk to us about what that means.
Sure, thank you, Dean Pritchett. Really appreciate it. I'm gonna go ahead and stand and use this podium for my notes here. Welcome everybody, thank you so much for inviting me to pinch hit for my friend and colleague Jordan Beasley at the Colorado Department of Agriculture. Thank you panelists for letting me here. Thank you everyone for coming. In particular, thank you FFA students for coming for today. Really appreciate your presence here. I am Hollis Glenn. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Operations for the Department of Agriculture. I am, as I just mentioned, pinch hitting for the other Deputy Commissioner Jordan Beasley, who oversees the external affairs and policy. So he's effectively our legislative liaison, and he lives and breathes policy and legislation and bills day in and day out. I'm forced, after he's done, to actually have to implement the bill, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. Jordan sends his deepest apologies. He, just like so many people these days right now, is fighting that crud and is unfortunately unable to stay here. But I just want to acknowledge Jordan's, not only was he a panelist here, but he is also one of the major players on the team into putting on this entire summit today. So he's very, I'm going to be honest, he's very depressed that he's not here today. A lot of big effort has gone in here with Becca and the other team, and Jordan is right up there with that team. So I just want to publicly acknowledge Jordan's efforts to putting this whole event on. So we're talking about, the previous session earlier was talking about federal policy, and we're going to drive it down to the state policy. I have Jordan's notes. But I got them, and Becca got me into this about maybe 12 hours ago. So it might be a titch choppy, but I'm also going to take Jordan's notes, and I'm going to, as I mentioned, he did policy. He's Deputy Commissioner of External Affairs. I'm internal. I do operations. And so, as I said, I'm going to try and interject some of my perspective of what Jordan's going to say here on operation and making policy actually come through, that call to action, as we mentioned. And I want to appreciate, you know, the analogy of, you know, sometimes this can be a mess, right? It can be squishy. And that is really kind of, when you think about good policy, good legislation, like the whole goal is to minimize that mess, because it can get ugly when we have to implement a bill that's codified in law and then begin to implement it. We find all sorts of problems that we, the legislators, the lobbyists, the stakeholders, everybody, the lawyers, didn't catch. So I'm going to try and hit some of those points as I walk through Jordan's notes here about state levels regarding policy. So when you think about state policy, It's made up in different levels. Places people usually begin to think of is obviously the state legislature, but just policy decision making is really made at all levels of government, particularly in the executive branch, from the governor's office, the governor's administration, down to the executive directors or the commissioners, like Commissioner Greenberg at Ag, and then down to even the division directors as well. And the legislature is also the ones that really determine the budget, right? The resources here in the state, which is arguably the most influential policy lever that we can do at the state, is the budget, the broad budget, the long bill, but also the budget for any initiatives that they're, or any bills that they're looking to pass. Many state agencies have programs or services that are allowed to be offered by law, but the legislature does not provide the financial resources to implement that. I texted Jordan last night. I said, "What do you mean by that?" And they said, "Are you talking about an unfunded mandate?" And he goes, "Yeah." An unfunded mandate is something that can be done here in the state. It's not ideal from an operational standpoint, and effectively what that is that's a bill passed, and I'll just pick on CDA. That's a bill that CDA has to implement, a project or a program CDA would have to implement with no funding, with no additional resources. And I'm not just talking dollars, but I'm talking FTE, I'm talking equipment, cars, travel expenses. Those are unfunded mandates. And as an operation and as a state agency, we always want to be careful on that. So if legislators who are visionary, right, and that's what we want them to be, big picture, drive the change, be the catalyst for change, when they get down to the implementation, it is important that states infecting policy, to be successful in policy, we need the resources. So we want to be careful whenever a bill comes that we can get we have the necessary resources. Some legislation can pass, and we have the staff. We can do it, no problem. And that happens quite often too. But that's always a really important issue to be considered when bill is going through the legislative process. If you are interested in changing laws, it's important to develop relationships with those lawmakers, those state lawmakers, so that they understand the issues and concerns that they're trying to address. Many organizations, yes, they hire professional lobbyists, but that's not the only way. You know, we encourage you to connect with those lobbyists as well, but that's not only the way organizations and individuals, members of the public can engage in the legislative process. The legislative bills, they'll go through hearings. They actually go through 2 hearings. They're open for public comments. I'm sure you have seen in the news when there's a really contentious bill, you'll hear about these hearings that go late into the night. Every bill has a hearing. Every bill has an opportunity for members of the public, associations to come and testify for or against. The Colorado Department of Agriculture will also go and testify. Most of the time when we go to testify, we're going to be testifying on what we'll call technical assistance, right? Because we serve at the pleasure of the governor. We're part of the executive branch, right? I do, but I don't have an opinion on legislation, particularly controversial legislation, right? That is going to be coming down to CDA that we may have to develop, right? We are neutral in that sense. But we may testify as like technical support. So we'll go to those legislators. They may ask us questions. Can you implement this? How do you know this? What is your analysis of that? What data do you have about that? So we'll provide technical assistance, but typically, we will stay neutral in our position on legislation unless the governor says we're going to support that or this is an initiative that they want to support. I lost my spot where Jordan's notes are here, so I'm just going to wing it. In addition to the legislative process and bills being passed here in Colorado and in the United States, obviously we have a democratic process for passing laws through the ballot initiatives, right? Everyone, this is a 101 course, right? So I think everyone understands that here is where you collect, individuals create a ballot initiative that everyone votes on in November. The greatest and most successful recent history here is obviously FF with school food nutrition program passing just last month. So those allow people to be able to directly allow all citizens directly vote and have a say on those legislations. Kicking it back to the legislative process and the Colorado General Assembly, they're going to pass laws. Important to understand that's just the first step. As we just mentioned, it kind of gets squishy when after the bill. The work has really just begun. Like Jordan's job's done, right? Legislative session ends, he goes on vacation for like 2 weeks. We then, from an operational standpoint, our division directors and our staff, we have to take a look at this bill and say, okay, what do we have to do and what do we have and what resources do we have to do it? Often when we implement a piece of legislation by a state agency, it's just as much as if not greater influence over the outcome. So, like I just said, the legislation passes, that cake is still baked, is not baked yet, right? We have to implement it. And so that is really another opportunity for nonprofit associations, advocacy associations, individuals, stakeholders that are directly impacted positively or negatively on said bill, on said new program, such as the Community Food Access Program that we're standing up. When we develop and we design these programs from this legislation, that is really an opportunity for, again, as I said, the public and the nonprofits to really influence how we build that program, right? Everyone can see the legislation. It's kind of like the rules, right? Here's what it basically is. But we are not experts sometimes, right? We need and rely on heavily the stakeholder process. And this is not just CDA I'm talking about every agency. It's CDA, Human Services, CDLE, Labor and Employment, CDPHE, all of us utilize and rely on the stakeholder process, in which is, again, announced publicly. They're public meetings, they're virtual nowadays. I mean, I guess that's a silver lining with COVID. A lot of this stuff is now virtual, so we can get geographic representation and input. So you don't have to live in the Denver metro area. And these stakeholder meetings are important. They're engaged. These are usually done and held often when we're designing programs. We're holding 3 stakeholder meetings coming up in the next couple of months on the Community Food Access Program. By the way, I'm going to be plugging that program here in the time I have left. But also through rulemaking. Now, we have, like a lot of times is the bills, the legislative bills, the policy is like a framework. It's not detailed. It can't be that detailed because it's legislation for a couple of reasons. One, legislation is permanent. You can't change it unless you run another bill. But they can't think of all the details when they're putting a piece of legislation together. So they give the state programs, state agencies, authorities to adopt rules. They have the same effect of law. Particularly on programs that are regulatory in nature. We design rules. You have to do this, this, this to get a license. And if you do this, 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 we're going to take away your license, right? But also things like grants. When we issue grant programs, we get $5 million, we get $10 million, we're going to issue grants to young farmers or to nonprofit associations, but it's a competitive process. People are going to have to bid for those grant dollars. You know what? We're going to have to maybe codify what the criteria is and how those dollars can be spent through rule. We have to get the details in the rule. When we design rules, again, we go through the stakeholder process, which is another place to engage and help us craft those, because again, we're not the experts either. But also then there are we publicly notice these rules, and there are rulemaking hearings. Just like the hearing for the legislation that's going through, there's rulemaking hearing on the agency level, in which there's public comments as well. And we take those very seriously. People can provide written comments. People can come in and testify in person. We take those comments. We think about it because we have a draft rule that people are commenting on. And then we will then massage that rule based on the feedback and the comments that we get from the public. So that's another area in where the public and nonprofits can help really engage and really get to that policy, that thing that started out of a vision, from a visionary idea from a representative or someone from the legislature, to actually implementing it, making this thing actually work. That's in 3515, 103 sub A 2 P4, Roman numeral I, right? We need stakeholder engagement and rulemaking assistance and public input in setting that up. One other, I'm going to digress here, if y'all on that tinned cup see, and Dean Pritchett mentioned, I'm a member of the Colorado Food Systems Advisory Council, and they're a major sponsor of this whole event. And I want to share a little bit about who they are, because they're an excellent resource. So again, okay, this is my second shameless plug. COFSAC, Colorado Food Systems Advisory Council, right, is housed at CSU. It's in partnership with CDA. We are members, and there are members of the public, there's members of state agencies that are appointed by the governor to be just what the name says. We are an advisory council on food systems issues. This is why they're a big player in putting this event on today. But we are advisory, we are a think tank, we're nonpartisan, we're neutral, but we are looking at issues like broad issues like food systems, the supply chain, environmental issues, food justice issues, equity issues. We're looking at all of these issues as a team because we're advisory. So how can we help? Someone has an idea that they want to run and make a policy idea, come see COFSAC. We'll do the research. We'll look into that issue. We'll do a white paper. We'll work on how do we communicate that. We're looking to see how can we be that early adopters of an idea and incubate that so when it goes to that legislature who's just visionary but doesn't know the detail, we can get that legislature a much more stronger conceptual idea of legislation. And the better we can do that on the front end, the easier that legislation will go through and easier to adopt. So the COFSAC Advisory Council is a tremendous council. Very important work as far as providing that early advisory work, and we advise executive directors or commissioners, or we advise the governor, or we can even assist those legislators. So there's my shout out to COFSAC. Wrapping up really quick, I want to introduce the role of the Colorado Department of Agriculture in state policy. At the CDA, we advocate for legislative changes, just like you. Just like other nonprofits. We advocate for legislative changes just like many other organizations, individuals, as well as being the ones that have to actually implement those. So sometimes we will be neutral, but sometimes we will advocate for those, again, based on kind of what is the direction and the vision of the executive branch, because they're looking at 10,000 foot view on an issue, not just ag, but they may say, how does that impact human services or labor employment or natural resources? Great example here, and back to my plug, is example of House Bill 1380 that passed last year. They created the Community Food Access Program at CDA. We did advocate for that program. We're in the middle, so Jordan advocated for it. Now I have to implement it. And we advocated for that. This is an $8 million program for us to help provide fresh food, healthy food in underserved areas in Colorado, working with small retailers and farmers. More on that later. But we advocated for that position. But that was an excellent, that was an industry-led bill, but it's an excellent example of how they got engaged with CDA early to say, hey, we want to run this bill. It's coming to you. What do you need to implement? What do you need to do to be successful? Will this work from our regulatory standpoint? Because we're a state agency, right? We have constraints. We don't move at the speed of light. So it was really helpful, and it was really great in a partnership that was a bill that we were able to support and also help craft languages ahead of time. So when it went through the legislative process and we're here, we're now implementing it. I still see little problems that we had to fix on this program, but it was a really great initiative and great an effort, and we're looking forward to issuing the Community Food Access Program. So with that, that's my time, a little bit about state law, policy, and how CDA interacts. So thank you very much for your time.
Hollis, thank you. I was writing down some of those levers that had to do with budget, relationships, rulemaking, grants, initiatives, advocacy, lots of levers that we can pull, and they all kind of fit together. I'll be curious to hear Jim Ehrlich's perspective from the Colorado Potato Administrative Committee and the levers that he sees and how they interact in this space. Jim.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for allowing me to be here. I'm humbled because I don't deserve to be here. Becca just made me do it. The reality of it is I have an opinion and I will voice it. So congratulations, Hollis, that you don't have to do that. I'm a strong advocate for potato growers, and I will do that here today. My shameless plug is potatoes have no fat, no cholesterol, no sodium. You need to eat more of them. They have almost 45% of your daily requirement of vitamin C and more potassium than a banana. Now that I have that done, we can move on. Okay, so I represent the Colorado Potato Administrative Committee, which is a state and federal marketing order in the San Luis Valley. What does that mean to you? Probably nothing, right? But I'll try to explain a little bit. So marketing orders were actually, they're created statutorily through the Agricultural Marketing Agreement Act that was created in 1937. And they actually came about because during the Depression, farmers were having a really difficult time, especially trying to get good prices. And so Congress tried to create this mechanism that would allow producers to create marketing orders. And so in Colorado, in the San Luis Valley, and also in other parts of the state, the farmers decided they needed a marketing order. And so these orders are actually locally driven, geographically connected, where you, like in this, ours is just the San Luis Valley. And the farmers in about 1939 in the San Luis Valley were shipping a lot of potatoes to the southeastern parts of the United States, and lo and behold, we still do that today. But when the potatoes got there were quality problems with them. They didn't want to get paid. They didn't want to pay for them. They were all being shipped by rail. The situation was much different. There wasn't long-term storage like there is today. So the farmers decided they needed a marketing order that they could require inspection of the product when it left the area, and also set size and grade and transportation and packaging standards within this marketing order that all producers would have to follow. So it's driven by the producers, it's regional, but it's statutory, all right? And we're kind of unique in Colorado that we have both the state and federal marketing order. So there's a lot of oversight of our organization. Our committee is actually quite large in the San Luis Valley. We have 26 committee members, 13 members, 13 alternates. And they make all the decisions for what we do as far as size and grade and things like that. We do a survey every 3 years, and the growers decide what those standards should be. And truthfully, that is somewhat driven by your retail customers today. They won't, I mean, if you want to send an inferior product, they're not going to let you do that. They set the standard pretty high. But that's not all we do at Colorado Potato Administrative Committee. We do a lot of other things. We basically are focused on unifying the different segments within our industry in order to make sure that our growers are profitable and sustainable. And so our committee covers a lot of different things. We have great partnership with CDA and the inspection service, because every load that we ship out of the state has to be inspected. Hollis made the point that sometimes the state doesn't have the resources. Well, yeah, they don't. And so what they do is then you have to fund the program. So the growers actually pay for the inspection service, all right? The state doesn't pay for it. They may pay for pieces of it, you know, some of the infrastructure and what do they call that always? Overhead, yeah, whatever that is, I'm not sure. But growers pay for the inspection service, all right? One of the key things that I think when you talk about what marketing orders can and cannot do, we do a lot of research, promotion, and education. We focus on that. We cannot lobby. We actually have a lobbyist firm hired to keep track of what happens at the legislature so that we know when things are really important and going to affect us and how we need to react to that educational-wise. So we try to form a good relationship with our legislators so that we know ahead of time what they're thinking. And if we need something in legislation, they know already what we're after, or what we think is important, or what the impact of some of these bills will be on us. For instance, we have a new House member. We're meeting with him next week just to get to know him, form a relationship, educate him around the importance of our industry. If you've never been to the San Luis Valley, the economy is agriculturally driven, and our industry is the key component of that. I'm proud to say that. We have about 150 potato farmers there that work extremely hard to put potatoes on your plate every single day, especially when you eat more of them, all right? I think we do a lot of things beyond the marketing order aspect of it, But one of the key components of the marketing order was it was designed to help growers get better prices. All right, so we report on shipments and pricing every single day so a grower will know what the movement is, what the prices are. So if he's ready to sell his crop, he'll have that information. I think that's important, but it was also designed on that quality aspect to make sure that the consumers got a quality product, a consistent product all the time. And I think I've probably told you enough because you probably just want to go eat a potato.
Jim, thank you. One of the things that struck me as you were talking was the importance of collective action in promoting potato production in Colorado, and how you have to have a common narrative around that. So you actually have a group of growers that help to organize what your priorities are and work with each other, and that becomes really an important lever at the state level. Roberto Mesa is with us today. Talk a little bit about the East Denver Food Hub with us, and also the Ag Commission. So I'm curious about collective action and the levers that you utilize.
Yeah, I'm also going to stand over here. It's easier. Yeah. All right. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a privilege for me to both be a farmer and be in community with the panelists here and the work that we do for the agriculture community and for our community of eaters around the state. Just to kind of provide some background on myself, my name is Roberto Mesa. I'm a first-generation farmer. I grow microgreens in a controlled environment greenhouse in Bennett, Colorado. It's a 35-acre farm, and when I first arrived at at this plot with my co-founder, David Demerly, we're both high school friends, and we didn't know where to start. We were like, we want to do this, we have the passion, but we lack some of the resources, we lack some technical assistance. We're just getting in on this learning curve on becoming entrepreneurs, and we didn't know quite where to start. But we knew that we wanted to do this in right relationship with each other, with the land, with our resources, and with our community. And it was those values that really guided us in the pursuit of this dream that we both wanted to see flourish, right? We wanted to have an impact and do this in a manner that was transformative, not only for ourselves, but for our communities as well. And everything was going amazing. We started the business in 2017. We, previous to that, acquired the land in 2013, and we were just gathering all the resources that we could find. We didn't know when we were going to use it, but we were getting gravel, and we were getting empty tubs to see if we could use them as grow beds, or just farm implements and tools. And we're like, one day we'll figure out what to do with them. So we stockpiled a bunch of resources, and it started to turn into this, I would say, like a mosaic of all these different things. And as we started to pay attention to the food economy, the markets, the opportunities, and the challenges, those things started to take some shape, and the farm started to take a form as well. And so, back in 2017, people were hearing about this new product, microgreens, which had a heyday probably in the 1990s with chefs and restaurants in San Francisco. And so we realized, hey, this is one way that we could quickly engage in this learning curve of being entrepreneurs, developing the business, and having a product, and then engaging in the food economy. And we did fairly well acquiring the resources that we needed until the pandemic happened. And then this kind of shifted everything. And for me, it revealed the need to really look at the systemic problems. And that gave us an opportunity to engage in conversations that for the first time, farmers were invited to participate in. And it had a transformative effect on me to know that, hey, we're no longer behind the scenes. We're not just farmers on our farm producing food. Our stories are not devoid of the products that we're supplying to our communities are not devoid of our story. And so it dawned on me that, hey, this is an opportunity that we need to take. And as tough as COVID was on our communities, it did kind of interrupt the flow of the status quo, right, as business as usual. Enough for us to come together and for farmers to see themselves as leaders. And through the support and the participation in Mile High Farmers, which is the local chapter of the National Young Farmers Coalition, I was given the opportunity to really step up in those spaces and really advocate for my community. And so this kind of trajectory began to take form now as a member of the Agricultural Commission for the Department of Agriculture. There was an event, I think it was drive-in, with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union and National Young Farmers Coalition, and Commissioner Greenberg was there. And I asked her, I was like, Commissioner, I'd love to know more about the Ag Commission. Like, what does it do? How does it inform policy? And how can I get involved? Well, I think 2 or 3 years later, she called me up and asked me if I was still interested. And I was like, absolutely. And so I applied and was moving through the selection process. And obviously, it's a governor-appointed position. And so Governor Polis and I had a discussion/interview, and he asked me something that I think really gets to the true heart of being an Ag Commission member, and that's how do you deal with different points of view, different engagement with the challenges and different communities that are affected in very specific and unique ways by policy. And so I said, I see myself as a bridge builder and a conduit for communities that perhaps may not have the time or capacity or resources to access this information and to really, advocate on their behalf. And so I think that really resonated with him, and eventually, he appointed me. So in my experience, I think being part of the Ag Commission has really given me an opportunity to feel in community with a group of incredible stewards of agriculture industry who represent all different forms of agriculture and regions. There's a diversity of perspectives, and we all get to impart our perspectives and advise the commissioner, the General Assembly, and the governor on food systems and agriculture-related matters based on our experiences and our relationships to farmers in our region. And so I think that's one of the major ways that we inform policy, because we are able to advocate for these needs and say, hey, we're struggling with water. How can we address that? Or, the markets are really erratic in this moment of economic uncertainty. What are things that we can do to address farmer viability, but also, community food security? And so those eventually become, they go through a process of actually becoming language for policy someday, right? The other way in which we kind of inform policy, as Hollis communicated, is actually through advising the commissioner through the rulemaking and developing policies that allow for the implementation of some of these bills and policies. And so we get to approve all of the rules and find appointees to make sure that these programs are done in an equitable and efficient manner. And in our Ag Commissions, which we have once a month, we have different reports, and Jim has done presentations. There's a few others across the state from the department have also shared information on their programs. And so as the Ag Commission, we get to really kind of hold space for all of that and think through how could this affect this particular type of farmer or this community, or how does it impact this region? And so together we really come together to find the nuances and the challenges and sometimes the oversights that often happen when we're dealing with policy. So it's been an incredible experience to just feel part of this community, and as a farmer, it gives me a sense of what's on the horizon. How do we pivot in a certain manner? How do I ensure that our communities have the information they need to make appropriate decisions on their farm or as producers, right? So it becomes a collective conversation with multiple stakeholders, and really centers on supporting the large-scale producers as much as the smallholder farmers, right? And so that for me is an incredible way to build community and, like I said in the beginning, to be a bridge between all of our regions. And so, let's see. And so I guess where we are now, you know, I definitely feel like I'm still learning. This is my first year, and it's also a quick learning curve in policy, working with other organizations as well. And I think for me, you know, I see my role again in building trust, and I think that's an important detail that really helps a lot of this work move forward and a lot of the systems change that are necessary. And I think so often, you know, before I got into this work, I began to see kind of like, you know, kind of my assumptions were that policies were happening and, you know, my voice wasn't there or other farmers' voice wasn't there. And so I didn't feel connected. I didn't feel like I was part of that movement. I didn't feel like policymakers had my interests in mind when they were making these decisions. And so now that I'm in these places and in these conversations, my focus is really to build trust with communities, right? And to really understand what their challenges are so that we can create a framework that moves some of these things forward that can create a benefit, a net benefit for communities, right? For our agricultural producers, but also for our environments at the same time. And so I think the new and emerging role that the Ag Commission is playing is really how do we develop those community relationships with our regional producers, and how do we have a more ecosystems understanding of the policies that are needed to address some of our current challenges, whether they're based on water or resources or the markets that we're trying to uplift right now and center. And so, you know, transitioning now to my role with the East Denver Food Hub, and as a farmer with Emerald Gardens, you know, we're trying to really showcase what this ecosystem of equitable food resilience and farmer viability can look like, because we really need a model to address the current challenges with drought, right? Erratic temperature changes, wildfires, but also inflation, right? The rising cost of seeds and our inputs, and also the rising cost of food. It's like a big untangled mess. So how do we create models that we can pilot that are also evident within these bills that are coming through the legislature, so that we can kind of rapid prototype those things, implement them, and then go back to our representatives and to the Ag Commission to say, look, this is what's happening, this is what's working, this is what's not working. Let's figure it out. Let's create the thought partnership necessary to move some of these things forward. And I think, you know, for me, I'm really like, how can I say this? Very appreciative of the turn that the Department of Agriculture has taken to really focus on farmer viability, community food security, and local markets, local economies, and support for our local agricultural producers. So this big kind of shift, I think, is caused by the new understanding that COVID has provided for us, the pandemic, and so many other challenges that we're now coming together to be like, hey, we need to really focus on what's going on. And so things like the Farm to Market Infrastructure Grant is a great example of the department and the state really coming together to focus on food resilience. Because, you know, as one of my favorite quotes, and actually I want to ask a question before I end. How many of you are involved in policy? Just raise your hand. Okay. And how many of you are affected by agricultural policy? Raise your hand. Pretty much everybody. You know, one of my favorite quotes is by Wendell Berry, who says, agriculture, or eating, is an agricultural act. So we are all here impacted by those decisions that are made that impact agriculture. And so we really all have a voice. And my closing comment is just to say that if there is something that you see, that you feel as somebody participating in this agricultural act, feel free to come to me or to another commissioner to develop relationships with your representatives and say, hey, this is important, right? And we are able to create the pathways forward to bring people at the table together so that we can think through some of these things and finally resolve some challenges that will hopefully yield this equitable, resilient food system that we all want to participate in. So thank you.
Roberto, thank you for your service on the Ag Commission. I just thought what a wonderful way to describe the purpose and what your role is, to take concerns and vision and turn those into language, and language that informs. And it's such an interesting fulcrum that the Ag Commission is for the state of Colorado, because it goes beyond just an individual role or an individual geography, and really leverages that to understand implications across the state. So really interesting lever, really interesting set of interactions and hats you wear as part of that process. I'm really interested in Ashley Whelan's hats too, and her intersections with policy with Hunger Free Colorado. So Ashley, if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I guess I'll stand up, follow the trend. I'm Ashley Whelan with Hunger Free Colorado. I'm the policy director there, and I'm excited. I see a lot of folks here who we work with and who are advocates for food security. And then I have to mention our founder is here, Kathy Underhill. She's the reason we exist, so thank you, Kathy, and for leading the way in this anti-hunger work in Colorado. Hunger Free Colorado, we have a couple different things that we do that are helping folks get access to nutrition programs. So we believe everybody should have access to healthy food, and how we do that is making sure people can get food through the SNAP program, formerly known as food stamps, through the WIC program for mothers and infants and children, and then also, most recently through Healthy School Meals and the campaign that was just passed, FF, and we'll have school meals in every school for every kid. There were school meals, but now it's available to every kid starting next school year. The policy levers, most of the nutrition programs are funded with federal dollars, but they interact with the state, right? And state programs, I work more closely usually with folks like Kathy that is now at CDHS that implement those SNAP programs and the WIC programs. But also Jordan and I have worked together, who is not here, on those administrative rules and those pieces. And like Jim, I have lots of opinions. I don't know about potatoes, but I do have lots of opinions on food and access to food, and that's part of health, and that's part of how we can be healthy, and every person should be able to be healthy and have access to food. And so when there are laws passed, we try and be involved and comment on the rules that are happening. Right now, the Healthy School Meals for All program was passed by the legislature, referred it over to the public, and they passed it. And so now we have rulemaking happening. So it is an intense time of rulemaking to get that in place next year, and then to get the other programs to help with local procurement and all those other pieces the following year. And so there's lots of talking to departments that we do as advocates to make sure that they're hearing the voices of community. And Hunger Free is really trying to be even better at having community voices be part of the work we do. So we do a lot with the administration, we do a lot with those pieces. And then I'm a political nerd, so I've been at the Capitol for probably 20 years. And I do think that getting to know those legislators and those leaders is a powerful tool to be able to make change. And it was key in getting a referred measure for school meals. It's key in funding our nutrition programs and our outreach around our nutrition programs. And so building relationships with those folks, not just from my perspective, but also community getting to know their legislators and getting to know the people and the folks in the administration, and really building those relationships is really key. And we're happy to provide some input to folks who want to be more involved and be part of that. The Healthy School Meals for All ballot initiative is a great example, I think, of change and finding a policy window. And the window came up because, like Roberto said, policy windows have come up for him as well because of COVID. And I think COVID really showed that when something so horrible happens, one of the first things to go is food security. And it also showed food security is real and people are facing it. And the Congress acted, and we saw things go in place, and we saw how the things that a lot of us have known and fought for a long time, they were proven, right? That school meals for all, that more kids would eat, that there'd be less shame and stigma, that if districts have more dollars in the future, I hope they'll be able to buy healthy foods and focus on nutrition. And so that policy window happened, and we needed to seize on it and needed to not let that end for as long as possible. So working with our legislature, working with others, really educating them on what we saw happening when the federal government was paying for school meals. And we do the same thing around other programs, educate the government and the legislators on what programs are working every session, and able to use that moment to have the legislature refer it and work with legislators to move it forward, and then running and working on a campaign to pass it through the voters. But you can have huge policy impacts by I would say huge policy impacts, not just at getting to know your legislators, but also going to the administration and working with administration folks around what they're doing and how they're implementing programs. So I think I'll leave it at that. But the policy levers are really available to folks. I think it's kind of scary, but joining coalitions, becoming a community advocate like Megan over here and Banu over here, like having getting involved really can have a big impact. And it seems a little hard and foreign, but I started doing that in college when I was 19 years old. And so folks here, you can start getting involved and letting folks know your opinions and be part of all of this really more easily than most people know. So I'll leave it at that.
Ashley, thank you for that. I really appreciated how you talked about the window of opportunity that exists both for policy and levers, but also for people to get involved. And that was a great message for us to think about as we think about becoming active. And I saw a lot of hands go up about folks that are active in the policy realm. I think you might have questions for this panel. So think about those really good questions. I'll pass you a mic so you can ask those. But before I do that, if the panelists are willing, I'd like to pitch a question to you. We talked a little bit about how some issues, windows of opportunities come up. And generally speaking, it requires a coalition in order to make anything happen. How do you form a coalition? Where do you spend your time? How do you prioritize? What is that? How does that all come together? Ashley.
Coalitions, first off, funders need to fund organizations to create coalitions. So, and funders need to fund paying people for their time. So, a lot of conversation with funders. People need to be able to afford to live, to advocate, and to have this that be part of their jobs too. But in forming coalitions, when we do see that funding, it does help in being able to bring in organizations. Well, in the hunger space, the Blueprint to End Hunger was funded by the Colorado Nonprofit Association and has brought together a lot of anti-hunger groups to be able, and folks in the agriculture community across different areas in a way that I think has been really helpful over the last 5 years. And so, having the backbone is really key to being able to ask people to put their time in. And then the other thing is building trust. And that takes a long time, and it takes a commitment, especially when you're building trusts of communities who are vulnerable, people who are low income. Why should people trust you? Is because you show up over and over and over again, and you prove that you're there to make a difference for everybody. And so those are I think having the resources and building trust are key components of coalition building.
Ashley, can I ask a quick follow-up question? Sure. For an average-sized coalition or issue that we're around,
Yeah.
whatever that means, how expensive? You talked resources. Bottom line, what would it cost?
I think it depends if you're creating a coalition around one policy versus creating a coalition around a whole systems movement. So, I think I won't give exact numbers, but, an investment that considers people and that they're valuable and that their time is valuable and that organizations' times are valuable and that really looking at that and creating that budget. But depending on the policy size, it's going to vary. Healthy School Meals for All, our coalition started with a grant to help through the legislative process of about $200,000, and it passed through money to smaller community-based organizations. It was the first time I've seen a ballot initiative run like this. Really putting your money where your mouth is and pulling in the folks and paying them has, I think, made the policy even better.
Other thoughts from panelists on coalition building that you'd like to add?
I'll provide perspective a little bit from a state agency and how do we build coalitions, because we're state agencies, so we have some obstacles that nonprofits and for-profit organizations don't have. And the one I'm thinking of that comes to mind is when you see legislation that's being drafted before it's been introduced, so before it's public. If it's a bill that's going to impact CDA, obviously those legislators, those bill drafters, they're going to give us a copy of that bill, and we're going to take a look at it again because we're going to say, yeah, we can do this, we can't do that, we're going to need X, Y, and Z, and so forth. That's because we're the agency of record this bill's going to come to, but we don't have the ability to share that because it's a confidential work product at that point. So I would love to call up Austin on a number of bills and be like, hey, do you know what's coming down the pike? And Austin might find out on his own, but I can't connect with Austin and discuss anything until it's read, right? And then, so again, I've been using the word, this cake is not fully baked, but as it starts to kind of rise, once it's public, then we do connect. And some of the best bills and policy I've been involved in, whether it's conservation easements or some other ones, fixing some of those issues, is literally sitting around a table in the Capitol with the legislator, with the bill drafter, and with a lot of the nonprofit advocacy organizations there on both sides. I see things, particularly if we're dealing with something controversial. The other points I would make is to Roberto's point, and Roberto is our ag commissioner, and ag commissioners, they are our sounding board. Kate, Commissioner Greenberg, myself, the CDA rely on, they are like our advisory council. So think of them almost as like a board of directors. They advise CDA. And so our policy, our coalitions usually start and begin there. We also have our partners. And the other last thing I would say about coalition building on a policy initiative from a state perspective, and this is true everywhere, is, the first thing we think about is I almost look at it like essentially a four-legged stool of stakeholders or four buckets. The more you have representation of these buckets, the better off we'll be in implementing and developing that policy. The first is obviously the state agencies, right? The state agencies, the state government. Then you have the nonprofit and the advocacy associations, right? The coalitions, the associations. Then you have private sector. You have the actual stakeholders. You have the farmers. You have the ranchers. You're engaging them on a one-on-one basis. And then the other one that is really important to think about when you build coalition, and this is for you, is building and looking at your academic institutions here in Colorado. They have great resources. They are just as passionate, and they have a lot of flexibility and creativity in dealing with that policy, whether it's a research, providing data, providing facts, providing outreach and education through CSU Extension. So it's not just CSU, it's CU, it's all of our state institutions of higher education. They are an excellent resource when you begin to build coalitions for policymaking.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to coalition building, it really is it's not a one time, it's not a moment in time. It's continuous. It's something that you're doing all the time through the education and the outreach that you make daily with other people that you visit with. You put yourself in situations that are new to you, that you're learning, and to Hollis's point, using the higher education institutions are really important for that. But it's like knowing about Hunger Free Colorado. It's knowing about farm to school. It's as a commodity organization, it's knowing those things exist and how can we interact and actually forming a relationship with them before they ever intend to do something. So that, to Ashley's point earlier, there's a trust level there already and a comfort level with what's going on. And what's tough is agriculture organizations are all connected anyway, and we have a good coalition of the ag organizations within the state, but they don't really want to, most farmers just want to stay home and farm and be left alone. And that's how I was when I was a farmer. But then you realize that the world's changing every single day, and you know, in 1920s you were farming with horses, and today tractors drive themselves. So you better pay attention, and you better stay educated, and you better reach out to others.
If I may, I'll provide just some final thoughts on that. Yeah, I mean, as a farmer, I take my cues and my motifs from the soil, and so I see coalitions as socially and politically engaged ecosystems, right, that are part of all of the other work that we do. And you know, I think providing like a national perspective from National Young Farmers Coalition is a good way for us to kind of see how the realities of individual farmers really can impact, you know, Farm Bill through all of these layers of advocacy and support. And you know, the Farm Bill is going to be something incredibly pivotal and historic here coming up. So the conversations that we're having in our communities are being uplifted by our state representatives, our agriculture communities, and departments to be able to really come together as a nation and be like, what do we need? And so I think, you know, the values of trust, communication, mutual aid and understanding, and bridge building are really the glue that holds coalitions together and really creates you know, necessary change.
Thank you for that, Roberto. So questions from our audience. I was just thinking about soil metaphors and how Dr. Gene Kelly, eminent soil scientist, is in the room. You have a question? Can I walk a mic up to you real quick?
Sure, I'm pretty good at projecting. You might not be. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Very good. My name is Lauren. Thank you all so much. This question is slightly more programmatic than policy. I farm in Boulder County area, and a lot of the programs that we have had some great success that have been implemented in the last couple of years are coming from the CDA. So the Ag Workforce Development Program and the STAR program are both sort of funds that we have been able to access, and they've been very accessible. The process has been easy to access. The outcome is pretty straightforward. The burden often is on our conservation districts or somebody other than me. And I'm putting that up against some of our federal programs through NRCS. We are constantly told that the best place to find conservation resources is through federal programs. And it is very good people operating with far too few resources. So I'm, and the process is literally years long to even be able to apply for those. So my question, which is probably for Glenn, but maybe others, is what are the funding mechanisms for those state programs that feel like they're working pretty well versus the federal ones? And with the Farm Bill coming up, is there any way to influence how those federal programs are serving growers? Yeah, I guess just, I don't know if that's a clear enough question, but I'm just wondering how.
Yeah,
Paulus,
absolutely.
I might just have you repeat the question real
Sure.
quick, just for the folks that are on camera.
Sure.
Yep.
I will, I'll do my best and summarize. The question before us is, state programs are fairly easy to apply for, or are very efficient to apply for, specifically at CDA. Thank you for that plug. Federal programs, not so much. What can we do to help make federal programs more accessible, easier to navigate for funding? Right? Great, thank you for that. Absolutely, and I don't know if anyone sat in on the federal policy one earlier, but they covered this thing. They said this very same thing, and they essentially said that when they look at the Farm Bill, this was Nick Colglazer, I believe, said, you know, when we're looking at Farm Bill, how do we move the needle on the Farm Bill? One of the things that we should be thinking about, one of the things we should be advocating for, and maybe this is something that the CDA or Colorado should do, and others and collective voice is to advocate for the Farm Bill to change, to reduce that red tape, reduce that overly burdensome, complicated, hard process for those federal dollars. The other thing that I'm seeing emerge, and I think it goes along a little bit what Ashley was saying about paying and providing people's times and understanding, but a little different, is one thing I think the states can do and CDA could do. I think we're looking to do more. We actually applied for a grant to help. Is we could apply, and CSU can do it and other institutes, we can apply technical assistance. If they're not, if it's a bunch of red tape and obstacles on a federal program, and that's a whole, changing that is probably the long game. The short game, let's get grants, let's get technical assistance, let's hire people who can navigate that obstacle, that can help overcome that, knows how to write grants, and let's provide them, and we'll pay them as a state to provide technical assistance to those farmers, to those ranchers, to those nonprofits, to those food hubs and pantries. They don't have the technical assistance often to look at a federal program. Often their brain, just like mine, will leak out of their head when they read it. So if we can provide that assistance, I think that would be a short-term strategy.
Yeah, and I would just say I know that the USDA is very understaffed, like thousands of positions, and this situation this situation came for a reason. So I love that idea that the state helping folks with technical assistance through that. But the reality is, I think that there's a lot of challenges right now and at the federal level in their administration of programs too. So keeping that in mind.
Another question from the audience. I'll probably call on you, Mike Bartolo, if nobody asks. Oh, got one right here.
Hi, my name's Megan. I farm in the San Luis Valley. And I have a follow-up for that question around those federal programs. And because CDA Thank You has made it so accessible for farmers and ranchers across the state, I'm curious, I'd like to hear from you, Roberto, here, in regards to making some movement in the Farm Bill, and specifically around some of the administrative burdens that both the USDA face, putting those programs out and then us trying to apply for them, which is terrifying. I wonder if there's ways to do it that wouldn't include legislation. And I'll use the example of the WIC modernization, the proposed rule for the women, infants, and children. So they're just kind of looking at the program and saying, oops, maybe we need to make it a little bit better because we haven't done it in a while. Is there a way to do that in some of the other spaces within the USDA to make it easier for us to get those pools of money and utilize them appropriately? So I'm kind of looking at you, Roberto, but for the group, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to do my best to rephrase the question. May need some help. So Megan, are you asking, about how we can kind of streamline the process and creating more kind of state flexibility for implementing some of these things that I think would be a little bit harder to do on a federal level? That's a good question.
On a federal level.
Yeah.
Because you guys did it here at CDA.
It's going to depend on the program and the statutes. And sorry, Megan, it's a program by program is my take, but.
I just wanted to say for that, so if you think about the LAMP program, which is the Local Agricultural Marketing Program, hopefully I got the acronym right, that's an example of a number of existing programs that were essentially repackaged as part of the 2018 Farm Bill. They were put in, so it's the Value-Added Producer Grant, it's the Local Food Promotion Program, it's the Farmers Market Promotion Program, and it's the Regional Food System Partnership Program. And the Ag Marketing Service administers all of those except the Value-Added Producer Grant Program. And I think if you look at what the Ag Marketing Service has done over the past several years, it is incredible how streamlined that application has become. And I think as a result, think about how many of those grants we've now received in the process has become much easier. So I do think that there are places where there's examples of that sort of transition occurring, but you have to remember that there's this difference between sort of the rulemaking process, as Hollis has done a great job talking about, and then the actual sort of like governance piece of it, which is how do we administer these programs, which is when you get to the nitty-gritty of the sort of application process.
And I'd like to also add to that, like another example would be the LFPA, a cooperative agreement, the local food purchasing cooperative agreement that was a national endeavor, and every state basically had their own way of implementing it and carrying it out. And we're learning, right? It was the first time that this happened, and we're getting a lot of insight from local communities and from the recipients and those that did not receive funds for how to actually do it better. So it's like, how can this big funding opportunity be more equitably implemented within individual states to accord with the specific needs and context of that state and those communities? So I think we're moving in that direction, and I think we're going to see more of these kinds of projects and funds in the future.
Would you please help me thank our panelists today for providing us with some advice and insights? Great set of topics, great questions that we had, more work to be done. Thank goodness we have lunch to go eat and we can spend time talking to each other. That's going to be out in the Great Hall, so join us out there for some conversation and some opportunities for fellowship.